We're going to begin taking some questions. I would ask that your questions be brief and that they be questions, which shouldn't be too much to ask. But please, when you ask your question, indicate who it's for. And if you could try to at least mostly direct it toward one person so we can get an opportunity for more questions and more interaction, that would be appreciated. Please.
Hi. First, I just want to thank you for coming and for speaking honestly. I know it's not always easy, and we appreciate it. I want to ask you about Sharia law, but I want to preface my question by saying that I'm not terribly interested in talking about Osama bin Laden's form of Sharia law or something like that. Last night, when Ambassador Seipel and Madeleine Albright were speaking, there was a lot of discussion about Christian principles and how when we're interacting in the public sphere, we have these Christian principles that we need to kind of measure what we do up against. And something that I'm very interested in is in the three monotheistic faiths, how religious law has functioned in kind of our histories. And in Judaism, it seems that mostly they've kept their religious law, but it's become a very privatized sort of thing. And in Christianity, we have whatever history of religious law we've had, we've kind of chosen to, I don't know, maybe set it aside and just function in this idea of Christian principles. And then when we step into the public sphere, we use these principles to decide how to interact. So I'd be interested to know, in your lives personally and generally, maybe you can give us a little history on how Sharia law and Muslim law has functioned privately and publicly. How do you see Sharia functioning in a public setting? Do you think it's supposed to function in a public setting? Especially if you do think it's supposed to function in a public setting, how it should positively interact with a national law, such as, American law, and whichever one of you feel more equipped to answer that, I'd be happy to.
It's probably going to require both, but Dr. Mujahid, why don't you? Dr. Mujahid. Dali Mujahid is who I work with, and I call her doctor, who is not a doctor. Dr. Mubarak.
I'm not a doctor. But anyhow, I think, first of all, in communities or countries where Muslims are not the majority, there is absolutely no room for Sharia to be implemented in any way, in any shape or form. And that's not something that Sharia actually asks of Muslims. When Muslims are a minority, there's a unique fiqh or jurisprudence that applies for Muslims where they exist as minorities or minority communities. Now, in Muslim majority countries, I think, again, what I advocate for is democracy. And if the democratic will, the majority will of the people, is that they want their religious values, if they want Sharia principles to be reflected in their society, then that should be respected. There should be room for that. And I find it problematic when Sharia as a whole is sort of vilified as this, archaic, oppressive sort of system, because I think it's completely inaccurate from a historical and legal perspective. Islamic law, a system of law, is basically it's derived primarily from the Quran and the Sunnah, but it's derived from other sources, and it's a legal system that existed for the last 1,300 years, or for about 13 centuries in the Muslim world, and was used to govern the Muslim populations in those countries. It was not used to govern the non-Muslim populations, the Christians and Jews. They were always governed and by their own laws, by their own religious laws. Now, you would say, in the 20th century, 21st century, where we have modern nation states that are secular, obviously we no longer have Sharia law being applied at all, except for a few cases, such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, that claim to be implementing Sharia, but that's very controversial. It's very, argument. There's no consensus on whether or not Sharia is actually applied today. But in the modern nation states that exist in the Muslim world today, where the majorities are Muslim, the only place where we see Sharia being implemented is really in family law. And one thing about Sharia, if we look at it from a historical perspective, is that it was always evolving. It was something that there was an organic, interaction with the society, with the changes that occurred in society, with the context in which it was operating, so that it was always relevant. It was to the circumstances that existed, and that's something, unfortunately, that is no longer the case, especially when it comes to Muslim family law that is still applied according to a Sharia framework. And I think that's sort of a discourse that the scholars need to initiate, that a reform. How do we push for reform that remains true to the values of Islam, to the principles of Islam? But I think when we're speaking about, again, communities where the majority of people are not Muslim, I really think there's no role for Sharia at all. I think what happens there is people reflect, just as Christian, we're in a secular, we have a secular government where our government is a-religious. It should be. For the goodness and for the betterment of religious freedom itself, it should be neutral and should not take a stand. So therefore, just as Christian Americans or Jewish Americans reflect their religious values in the public sphere, so do Muslim Americans. And in my opinion, everyone, even atheists, reflect to a certain extent their religious values in the public sphere, because whether your source of inspiration happens to be the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, or whether it's Greek philosophy, whatever your source of inspiration is, I think you bring those values to the public square inevitably, but it should, as long as we clearly draw the line where it should be drawn.
Let me just be real quick. I know you're trying to rush. 100% agree with Hadia, everything that she said. And, it's from the Quran that she got the principle in a non-Muslim majority society, Islamic law, is Sharia will not be applied. That's from, it's God that tells us that we are obligated to follow the law of the land within which we live. And this is not like this is always the worry, right? Oh, look at these really cool, progressive, moderate Muslims. They're really, hot and modern and saying really nice, soft things. No, this is a classical interpretation of the religion. This is not like, a spin-off. The second thing that I'll say very quickly, and again, I'm not here speaking as Gallup. I'd love to come back and show some polling. But when polled on these two questions, do you believe that the Bible should be a source of law in the United States? And do you believe that the clergy should be a part of the ruling, elected, governing society? American Christians poll higher than all Muslim states other than Saudi Arabia on the questions, do you think Sharia should be a source of legislation? Do you think that the imams and the clergy should be a part of the government? So in many of these conversations, we're not dealing with reality. We're dealing with our perceptions of ourselves and our perceptions of each other. So we sometimes continue to kind of miss the facts. Why are they clapping? I don't understand.
Thank you. I could not help but be tremendously moved and impressed by the absolutely remarkable courage that the two of you have displayed, and which leads me to my question. Courage in your triple identity as Muslims living in the United States, as Americans traveling abroad, and as Muslims among other Muslims. And therefore my question to you is the following, and I really believe that this courage is exemplary and should be applauded and deserve tremendous recognition. And it leads me to my question. How do you confront, educate us please, how do you confront what we usually confront on a daily basis, which is hatred and prejudice? We see it in all circles. We hear among very well-educated people statements such as, I'm weary of traveling to Spain, what will the Muslims do? What am I to expect if I travel to Morocco? Please educate us. Give us some very practical sense of where it is that you found this courage that you have. Thank you very much.
God bless you. Thank you. Well, God bless you. Thanks for the words. But it's alhamdulillah. Maybe thank God. Maybe it is courage. But we didn't create it. We were taught by people that are organic to this conversation, and they fostered our growth. And we are not anomalies. We come from a community of maybe 6 to 8 million people that are exactly like us. So God willing, as those people come to the forefront, we'll be getting a different taste, a different aesthetic for the conversation. The real answer to your question is I don't know. I think we have two clear tools. One tool is faith. And for me, the number one subdivision of that tool is love. There is a great deal of strength to love. And for those of us that were enthralled by the revolutionary zeal when we were in college, I think we've come around to a place where we understand the strength of love. And number two is, I think, with reality, with facts. Many times, the hatred that's embedded, the hatred that marinates, can only be moved from its resting place with things that are not expected, with surprises. And I think substantive surprises tend to be a strong element of that conversation. But as the Muslims say, I mean, God knows best. We are all attempting to further purify ourselves in this process, and God knows best how it's going to be done. But I assure you that, we're not doing anything different than you did when you were a rising part of the American fabric. And if we are able to succeed, even half of what the person that just answered the question, I feel like I'm on Oprah Winfrey. I can't see anybody, but if we can kind of offer half of the love and intelligence that you offered when you were our age, then God willing, we'll be able to solve this problem globally, I think.
Well, I don't know if you want both of us. Do you want both of us to come?
I'm going to be like Oprah and ask you to share your feelings on this question.
Well, like Ahmed said, I mean, I think there's no easy answer to your question, but thank you so much for your kind words. I think what I've seen from my personal experience is that personal interaction does a lot to break down and shatter a lot of the barriers that exist, because a lot of the fear and the mistrust and misunderstanding really stems from ignorance. And on both ends, on both sides, there's prejudice and hatred, unfortunately, on both ends. When you go to the Muslim world, I also confront this reality sometimes when I speak to people in Jordan and Syria, and they're shocked. They're always shocked to learn that I wear my scarf in America. And they have this image that Americans would be like chasing me down and like beating me up, and and I have to explain to them that actually Americans have a great deal of respect for religious freedom, for your individual freedom to do and live your life the way you want to live it. And so the misperceptions exist on both ends, but I think in America we're really challenged with this growth of Islamophobia, really, to put it bluntly, the fear of Islam, the vilification of Islam in public. And I think what's not helping is sort of the internet right now, the fact that you have these bloggers that are completely exploiting, I think, the current climate of legitimate fear to make individuals scared of the Muslims sitting right next to them, in the airport, in their classroom, in the workplace. And this is not going to help us move forward. It's not going to help us solve the problems of security that our country is facing. And it's not going to help us build a brighter future for America. So I think the first step is to try to meet someone that you are supposed to be afraid of. And I on some level, I sympathize. I understand that some people have never met a Muslim before, and all they see about Muslims are these images of people beheading others, of people calling for quote unquote jihad in their skewed perception of what that actually stands for. And so it's natural that people are afraid, but I think Muslim Americans have a responsibility to reach out to others, and when you confront individuals like the people you mentioned, to maybe help them meet a Muslim if you can, help them interact with a Muslim, because I feel like that goes a long way. Or to try to send them an article, an editorial. I always find it helpful when I find editorials written by Muslim Americans. I know Ahmed writes frequently, and I have other friends and colleagues out there who write from their experiences as Muslim Americans, and I think it's good to share that with individuals who've never heard the Muslim perspective before.
Thank you again for coming today. 15 years ago, I traveled outside of the U.S. for the first time and went to Pakistan. Spent 2 months there and met a group of people that I love still today.
So cool.
My question is, well, first, really, it seems like we are working together to try to work in American culture to return to a time where we can actually have content behind words and not just connotation, and I appreciate that.
Can I jack that phrase? Can I just steal? That's really good. Content, not connotation.
I stole it from Francis Schaeffer.
That's I'll send him the $5.
How do you engage Muslims from Muslim majority cultures in a fashion that helps to, or actually instills in them a confidence that you're not just Western relativists with Muslim clothing and trying to force that version of democracy or religious freedom, whatever you want to call it, onto them? How do you engage with them on that level?
Can I just say very quickly? You know, it's fascinating. The thing that is most uninteresting when I interact with Muslims in Muslim majority societies is everything that you would think they associate with America. Like, I'm not bringing MTV to them. I'm not bringing baggy jeans to them. I'm not bringing 50 Cent to them. They have all that. What I'm bringing to them is, oh my God, there are like Muslims in America? Like practicing Muslims in America? Like, you know, when I would explain, before I even had any of these jobs, when we would just go back to Egypt and explain and we are unique in that we speak Arabic. So we have, I think, a bit more penetration in these cultures than if we didn't speak Arabic. And maybe the interaction would be a little bit different. But, I mean, what is most fascinating to Muslim majority societies that don't get to engage Muslim America, but are very well engaged with America, is the kind of beauty of the Muslim component of America. That's how they see it. They don't see it as, you know, that limb. You know, remember when they chopped off my hand and sent it to America, and then the ummah is this whole body and like its hand is in America. That's not how they think of it at all. They think of it as a component of America. This is a part of their story. This is part of the American story. And it would be intellectually dishonest to say that the Muslim American identity today is as authentic as other Muslim identities. And this might be where Hadia and I disagree a little bit, and it might not, I don't know. But, you know, authenticity and authority within Muslim identity. Actually, I talked to Chris about this once in a faraway land called Doha, Qatar. You know, authenticity and authority within Muslim discourse, unfortunately, under kind of the stereotype of Muslim establishment, is still within the domain of Arabs and those who can speak Arabic and those who have traveled and lived amongst the Arabs to learn Islam. So, there are political realities. So you'll be sitting in a conference in Malaysia. Now this is of course not a generalization, it's just a slice. You'll be sitting in a conference in Malaysia, and the non-Arab Muslim participants in the conference might choose to amplify their anti-American political ideas as a means to amplify their Muslim identity in front of the people that they perceive to be the most Muslims at the table. Who are who? Who are the Arabs? Who really are who? Are the Saudis. And I say this as an Arab, somebody that's like way too Egyptian for his own good. Right? So the reality is, there is, and this is where we might disagree, an Arabization to the stereotype of what Muslim identity should be. It doesn't mean that what Arabs have offered Islam is necessarily malignant. It's not. It's not. But there is a perception that authority and authenticity comes from that link to the Arabs. Now, this is overcome by a number of things. A mastery of the Arabic language. There's a young brother named Suhaib Wed. Suhaib Wed is like this cat that's like from the Midwest and like ran a radio station in Sacramento. This kid's like becoming a scholar at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. When those guys come back, right, they set a tone. They offer that authenticity to the American experience of Islam. So, for Muslims to be perceived as an organic component of the global Muslim community, the global ummah, yeah, we're not there yet 100%. But who's anywhere 100%? I mean, c'est la vie, it's a process, right?
Just in terms of what I mentioned earlier, just to reiterate the point, I think when it comes to engaging with the Muslim community abroad, I really can't emphasize enough the importance of engaging an Islamic framework which is seen as legitimate in those societies, engaging the authentic sources of Islam, the Quran, the Hadith. And again, because like you mentioned, there is a perception that, exactly the way you framed it, that you are, that there are no real Muslim Americans. And when I went to Uganda with the State Department, we had that sort of, we had to shatter that barrier because the Muslim students in the Muslim schools we went to, they asked us if we could recite some verses from the Quran. There were 3 of us. There was an American Muslim imam. He was an African-American convert who's an imam now, and my husband and I. And we were asked if we would read some verses of the Quran. And then my husband and the imam were also asked if they could lead the prayer at different times. They wanted to make sure that these guys knew how to pray. They wanted to make sure that we were real Muslims and we weren't just dressed up. And I recall one of the questions was, do you always wear the headscarf, or are you just wearing it for this trip? So they felt like the embassy just dressed us up as Muslims and sent us out there. And you're right. I mean, there is this sort of barrier to overcome. And many people were shocked that there are practicing Muslim Americans, that we haven't lost our religious identity, we haven't lost our faith in America. But I think that demonstrates America's strength. And I think it goes to show what America actually stands for in terms of being a true religious pluralistic society, that people can maintain their faith and be committed to their religion without in being fully American without losing one or the other. So, but I think religious discourse is part of the solution.
And in many ways, vice versa, Josh. I'm ruining your kind of rotation here, but. In vice versa is true as well. Like if you go to post-Soviet like societies where Islam exists like in a prima facie experience, there will be this constant process of checking with you that the imam is doing the real thing, right? So come up to you and be like, "Hey, brother, is this how you do it over there? I mean, kind of like trying to say like, is this guy playing us or is this for real?" Because there's this search for there's this very. And of all the rooms in this city, this is the room that's going to understand. There is a search for the beauty of a relationship with God that's sourced in the authentic. And is sourced in the practices and procedures that have been conducted by all the other people that have attempted to form that relationship with God. And there is this very earnest and for lack of a better phrase, clean attempt at authenticity. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. I mean, that's a very, very beautiful thing. So there are contexts in which we are seen as the sounding board to make sure and then there are other contexts in which we are questioned as to the authenticity of what we're providing, I think.
I have to say, in Pakistan, I found there was an absolute fascination on the part of the Muslims in Pakistan with the American Muslim community. And they say, I've heard there are Muslims in America. Yes, there are.
It's amazing.
And they're interested in how that has played out and how did they feel after 9/11. And, I could just share some stories about what my friends had told to me, my Muslim friends in America. But I think there is the growing sense that maybe the Ummah is larger than we had thought. And maybe there are all these different modes of interaction with different political systems. And even in America, this is a very, very exciting concept.
And not just for the cab driver that's driving around a bunch of ambassadors in Kuala Lumpur city, but also for the girl that's in the girls section of a madrasa in the middle of the Farghana Valley that has a plastic for windows. She's running up to you to say, "Please give my salams to American Muslims." I mean, imagine. When I was 11 or 12 years old, did I understand the connection, the connectivity, the connectedness of me and all of these other people? I didn't. Look at how powerful that girl can be in changing the reality that we see on a regular basis. So much more powerful than any of us can be. But it requires an engagement and it requires a nurturing.
Please.
I really don't know how I can actually say this, but I'm just say it. On 9/11, the rage filled me to toward Muslims, because the only thing we had to see was the media's version of what Islam was being portrayed as. And today, I'm still curious about that. And I ask your forgiveness for that rage. Which leads me to a question. We have Abram's roots, but there is a very strong divide that occurred with the first generation after Abram between Isaac and Ishmael, each giving legitimacy to both the Judeo-Christian version of his first generation and the Islamic version. How do we reconcile or deal with that difference because of the perceived legitimacy of the existence of the other religion?
Hey, can I get a hug, man? God bless you. God bless you. Okay, Hadia, go for it.
I think I'm going to cry, so that was very moving. Thank you so much for your courage and your honesty. I mean, it was just very honest. And I think of course, we forgive you. I mean, I think it's human. It's absolutely human. I've seen this in the Muslim world, when something happens in Palestine and the feelings and the emotions that overcome people, for example, and the danger is in dehumanizing the other or in attaching a greater value to one human life over another human life because of ethnicity or religion or nationality. I mean, I think we have to remember that before any other identity, we are human beings. Before anything else, we all share the inevitable experiences of being born into this world and at one day leaving this world and facing God. And that is something we all share in common. And so, I remember the Imam that I mentioned who went with us to Uganda, he said, when a baby cries, what language is it cry in? When someone laughs, what language do they laugh in? What language does that person laugh in? And it's just the human. And when it comes to acts of violence and acts of terrorism, it's remembering it. And something I have to remind myself on a constant basis is to mourn for the loss of all of life equally. So when I hear of a tragedy in the Philippines, or when I hear of a tragedy in Palestine or in Israel, or if I hear of a tragedy in America or somewhere else in the world, that it pains me equally on all accounts, that I don't put a greater value, attach a greater value to one life over another. And I think that's the danger we're in today. I remember after 9/11, I was a student journalist with the FSU in Tallahassee, Florida, and one of the guys who was on our news staff, he got up and he just said it was the day of 9/11, that I just hope we go and we kill every single one of them. We go and bomb their countries and kill all of them. And I thought to myself, who is them? Who is he speaking about? The Muslims? Well, how does that make us any better? How is that any more moral than what the terrorists did when they came here to America, on our soil and inflicted this indiscriminate violence against innocent civilians? And how is that any different than when we go to Iraq, for example, and innocent civilians die, when we have what we call collateral damage? Does that, and that's sort of what I have some trouble with sometimes is, especially when I speak to some of my fellow Americans, and I feel that the loss of life in Afghanistan or Iraq, the innocent loss of life, when it's what we call, again, collateral damage, is not as painful to them as it would have been if it was of the loss of an American life or the loss of the life of an American soldier. And I think it's problematic at that point, because are we saying that one human life is worth more than another. And so I think it's just something that we have to kind of search within ourselves and keep ourselves in check when it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean, SubhanAllah, just God works in amazing ways. I mean, I think, I pray to God that we can be as honest with ourselves as you have been today with yourself. Let alone be honest with each other as much as you've been honest with us today. And, for all of us that live a life in pursuit of a life that is kind of referenced by its relationship to the Almighty, that's about the most Muslim, Christian, Jewish thing I've ever seen in my very short life, what you just did. So, God bless you, and thanks for... That's going to affect my prayers for a while. Thank you. God bless you.
Hi, my name is Enriqueta. I'm actually traveled here from Phoenix, Arizona. And Josh, I'm sorry, it's a little bit more than just a question. I'm here with a colleague from Scottsdale Bible Church, and we have a tremendous outreach division of our church. And after the things happened recently with the gentlemen coming off the plane that were in Phoenix, I believe they were the imams, there was a necessity with my senior pastor, Pastor Gerald El Hussein, to go out into the community and start engaging more, specifically in conversation with our Muslim brothers and sisters. And so that conversation is happening community level. And I think that one of the things that we don't talk about is really what's happening community to community. And I'm so excited about the Global Institute and what they're doing, and hopefully progressively we're going to be able to transcend that conversation. But I wanted to let you know that I did spend and have been spending time with Dr. Fazawi Maltong, who is the director of CARE in Phoenix. And it was previously, we spent hours together, and now have introduced her to our senior pastor, well, formerly our senior pastor, but he's now the president of our seminary in Phoenix. But the relationship has changed a little bit. CARE was recently put on the watch list as a terrorist organization. That relationship between she and I and our church hasn't changed, but the organization itself has been named now. How can we continue to have that respect dialogue when the State Department has labeled CARE? We want to really have a balanced conversation. We want to continue having that human relationship, but we also want to be mindful. Can you address that?
Let me just say very quickly, they're not on the State Department designated terrorist list. They're an unindicted co-conspirator in a specific criminal case that DOJ is prosecuting. So they're not. CARE is not on the State Department designation list, and they're also not. Their assets are not frozen pursuant to the executive order that other charities have been frozen. So that's on my little legal piece.
I think that's information that hasn't been really publicized.
Because
they really have gotten.
Of course.
Well, you also have to separate, the facts from sort of the what you call propaganda out there, because obviously you know about the anti-CARE website and the anti-CARE sort of rhetoric out there. CARE has done a lot of good work in terms of defending the civil liberties of Muslim Americans and trying to educate the public about Islam. And there are a lot of people, who are affiliated with CARE. As you know, CARE has 31 chapters throughout the country. So, and we know a lot of the people who work with CARE, and a lot of them are very good, dedicated individuals who are trying to really work for a better future for all people, and are nothing like what CARE has been described as. We know a lot of these individuals on a personal basis. So, in terms of, like Ahmed said, it's an unindicted conspirator, exactly, with the Holy Land Foundation case in Texas. But the issue there is that there aren't any formal charges, and therefore there's no trial where those charges could be either verified or proven to be false. So that's the problem with that designation. Is, like you said, what do organizations like yours do? Do they continue to interact, which is completely legal to do so? But then there's a repercussion in terms of your PR. Perhaps you might get a lot of hate mail. Your organization might be a target of hate from those who dislike CARE and see it as the enemy. So it's sort of this is sort of the quagmire. I think it's very reflective of what the Muslim American community is going through right now. Is that our organizations, our institutions are being scrutinized. I was just yesterday at the Department of Homeland Security. We had a roundtable on, it was basically integrating Muslim youth and issues of radicalization and extremism. But this was an issue that a colleague brought up, and saying that the government also needs to be consistent in the message it's sending to the community, because the Muslim community is vast. But you hear of cases where this Muslim family's home was raided, and this mosque was raided, and this Muslim charity, and at the same time, the Muslim community is trying to measure up to its responsibility to work with the government to make America more secure, because we see it as a civic duty, but more importantly, we see it as a religious duty, as a moral duty, as a duty before God to prevent harm, to make America safer for everyone. And so, obviously, we want to work with the government, with law enforcement officials and agencies, but I think the community overall is receiving mixed messages because of things like this, as you mentioned.
I also just wanted to reiterate, we're not ending our relationship. I was just curious as to how you would look at that prospectively. Right. But in fact, we are going to be engaging in some interfaith opportunities for outreach. So
it's a very real issue.
Doing Habitat for Humanity, doing these different social builds. I mean, just particular things that are important for the community, so that we continue to get to know each other. Again, it's really transcending, just this outside figure, and understanding what God has really laid on our hearts to do, to love each other. And if we believe in the Lord, I mean, this is the thing, it's supposed to be raised up.
Right.
So,
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you. Hi, Ali and Amit. This question is for either of you. With all these terrorist bombings, these suicide bombings, the explanation I've heard is that these people are being lied to. They're being told that if you die a martyr's death, you will be in heaven. I was wondering if there's any basis.
Sorry, did that happen on the microphone?
I was wondering if you know where this kind of explanation has come from, if there's any basis in the Quran or in the Islam faith. And another question is, we're all Christians here, and I don't get in contact with Muslims often. What is your explanation to how you get to heaven?
What is our explanation of?
Excuse me?
How you get to heaven.
From the Islam perspective, how do you get to heaven?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Maybe we could divide those up.
How you get to heaven? I mean, that answer is, I think, and Hadiya will correct me, through your deeds. I mean, for us as Muslims, belief in the Lord, practicing, what the prophets of the Lord, the prophets, plural, of the Lord have taught and said, and believing in the books, believing in the angels, and in kind of in the Islamic metaphysical sense, the existence that God has created. So you get to heaven through your deeds, and you get to hell through the same way, which becomes the issue. But that's like my short Cliff Note version. Your first question. Let me answer it this way: is the issue that we're dealing with globally in terms of radicalization of Muslims and acting out that radicalization, is that an issue that's sourced in theology? Definitely not. And it's not my cute answer. The data says definitely not.
I mean, just to add to that, on one hand, you have empirical evidence in terms of Muslim perception, but on the other hand, you have what the Islamic tradition itself says in regards to acts of violence, in regards to acts of terrorism, and it's very definitive that these are absolutely prohibited in Islam. There is no legitimate scholar that justified the actions of 9/11. In fact, the majority of this is something that never gets media attention. You had the most credible scholars throughout the Muslim world who we don't have a clerical body in Islam. So there is no single religious authority, but what represents the religious authority in the minds of Muslims are the conglomeration, the consensus of religious scholars. And unequivocally, they all said that it was absolutely condemnable and unjustified in Islam. And this is something that never receives the media attention that it should. Even scholars like Yusuf Qaradawi, who's one of the most influential Muslim scholars, who is unfortunately somewhat characterized as an extremist by some people in the West. Even someone like him came out definitively against acts of 9/11. And of course, we can go on forever in terms of theologically how that is to be argued. And in my conversations with Muslim youth in Pakistan, in Uganda, in Jordan, in various places, we go into these discussions and we give them hadith after hadith, prophetic tradition after another, that make it absolutely clear that you cannot target innocent civilians. And the Quran makes it clear, whoever kills one life, it's as if he has killed all of mankind. And whoever saves one life, it's as if he saved all of mankind. It's chapter 5, verse 35, I believe. And just in terms of, there was one more point I was going to add. I think you were asking about...
How do you get to heaven?
How do you get to heaven? In that regard, like Ahmed said, faith and works are both equally important. But one thing about Islam that is unique is that you never know. No one has a free pass into heaven. No one's guaranteed a free pass into heaven. So you never know who is guaranteed heaven, who is not. Where someone's life, whether the person is Muslim, whether the person is Christian, whether the person is a Jew, whether the person is Hindu, we don't know where that person stands in the eyes of God. Because what someone's relationship is with God, what their level of piety is, their level of morality is, we don't know, we can't judge. God alone can judge that. And that's very central to Muslim theology, that there's a tradition that is often repeated in Islam, that there was a prostitute. The Prophet, this is a prophetic tradition, a hadith, it's the second source of law, of Islamic law. The Prophet said there was a prostitute who one day saw a thirsty dog, a dog that was so thirsty he was going to die of thirst, there was a well nearby that he couldn't reach, so she pulled up some water for him and put some water in her shoe and let the dog drink water, and he said that this woman was going to enter heaven because of that act of goodness. And similarly, the Prophet told us a story of a woman who would fast so many days and would stay up the night praying and would pray, and who outwardly looked like a religious and pious person, but yet because of one act of cruelty, she would be going to hell, and that act of cruelty was actually locking up a cat in a room to the point where the cat actually died out of hunger. And because of that act of cruelty, that woman. So basically the conclusion is that we don't know where someone's going to end up. We don't know where someone stands in the eyes of God, what one action you might commit. So as Muslims, we're very cautious to repent of our sins on a regular basis, on a daily basis, and to try to live as upright and moral lives as possible, because we don't know what one action might make us look favorable or unfavorable in the eyes of God.
Sure. I think we have time for maybe 3 more quick questions, and if you could ask them in sequence, 1, 2, and 3, and then our panelists could address them before we go to lunch. And for the rest of you, maybe you could corner them briefly after this session.
Okay, nice to meet you here. And I finally conclude that the issue is the English, because both of you are American, and I'm actually from Korean.
Yeah.
So the reason why you have no agreement is because of the language. Both of you are speaking English, but no agreement. So I thought English problem.
That's it.
Yeah.
Believe me, the English are always a problem.
Yeah. And my native language is Korean, and I'm learning English. I'm studying in Anderson University School of Theology, and yesterday in the morning we drove more than 10 hours. So, but in the United States, I found that Eastern time and Central time, California time. So probably we have different times. You are saying God, and I am saying God, and everybody is saying God. But what the really God is, we don't know. So that is my, a little reflection. And my question is that I'm here that we have a case study saying that Korea, case study number 2, Korean missionary efforts re-evaluate after hostage crisis. So it's very intriguing to me, and also I'm here to add some of my perspectives on the Islam. And after, as you know, out of 23, 2 were killed by the Taliban, and it brought up some bad impression on Muslim in Korean society as well. And interestingly, probably in front of CNN, I hope, and the hostage after release, she said with deep weeping, said that still I love them, and I forgive them. So it really hits me. They are in our heart, they said. And one thing that, forgive my English, by the way. One thing she described at the time was that there are many women, pregnant women, but they during the birth, giving birth, many die because according to the Taliban, Taliban, it is prohibited to go to the man doctor, male doctor. So that kind of thing. So they are working. So that's hit me. And what I'm here is that to me, they don't have the freedom to choose, like because of the state. I experienced that when I was in Malaysia. Suddenly, announcement and everybody go to the worship, and one of them said that I don't have freedom, not to join the worship. So to me, is there any reform to that kind of thing? You separate the state and freedom.
Can I just take a couple quick cracks?
I think he's going to finish.
Want to do the rest?
We'll do all three questions quickly,
okay.
and then you can briefly respond.
Mine goes personally to the two of you, and my question is, during the course of your life, do any of you have an experience where where your identity and your religion and your faith have shaken you, where you have doubts?
Thank you.
I wanted to ask what you imagine are the kind of current political issues for American Muslims. And I ask this question from two perspectives. One is that in America, often subordinated groups or marginalized groups have linked with other groups, say in the way that Jews and African Americans linked to the Civil Rights Movement. Or they have taken ostensibly non-religious issues, evangelicals on the environment, Catholics now on immigration, and infused them with their own theologies. So I wondered if you could just sort of outline for us what kinds of issues you see on the horizon where we might expect to see American Muslims articulating their theology in the public square.
Thank you. Are you sure? Okay. Let me. I'll try to just kind of pick, and then Hediya will pick, and then maybe we'll get a chance to kind of wrap it up at the end. This point for the Korean brother about God, we're all there you are. We're all talking about God. What are we really talking about? Thank you. That's a good comment. What we are not trying to do is say, guys, we're all the same. Let's just be nice. Let's get over it. No. What we are saying is we are different. But what differentiates us from each other is most likely less significant in terms of quantity than what is common amongst us. So I wouldn't go to as a unfortunately one needs to identify this way just to explain it, but as a Sunni, I wouldn't go to a Shia Muslim community and say, look guys, we're all the same, there's no difference. No. There is a difference. And my job is to say that there is an orthodoxy to your interpretation, and there's an orthodoxy to my interpretation. So, what God are we talking? When I say God, I'm talking about the beginning before all beginnings, the ending after all endings, the source of love, mercy, justice, the creator of all creation that has not been created. When I say God, that's what I mean. Now, you want to call him Yahweh, you want to call him Jah, you want to call him God, the Arab Christians call him Allah, it doesn't matter. That's what I mean when I refer to God. The issue of freedom and the freedom, this is a very important issue. The Malaysian example might not work. Because the answer is, this is not an issue that needs reform. This is an issue that just needs the application of Islam. This is an issue that needs Sharia. To the second question. I mean, Islam is very clear. Non-Muslims that live in a Muslim society get 100% freedom, and there's an obligation upon the state to ensure the ability of those non-Muslims to exercise their religion before the obligation of ensuring that the vast majority of Muslims are allowed to exercise that religion. So, my response is, there is no Islamic state. This is my personal opinion. There is no Islamic state. Because there is no state that has rights for women equal to men. There is no state that has significant rights for Muslim minority communities. And there is no state that has significant religious freedom for non-Muslims within its context. So I would not say I would not point to any state and say that's an Islamic state. So, but the value of that concept, Islamic state, is for a different conversation. The current political issues, it's very interesting you say that. You know, after 9/11, all the meetings that Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security and the agencies have are Arab Muslim Sikh. The Arab Muslim Sikh task force on whatever. The Arab Muslim Sikh, and the Sikh brothers are always sitting there like, why are you lumping us in with these crazy, what's going on, man? I'm trying, we are calm people. Why are we here? And it's like, similarly disposed communities post 9/11. I mean, how many Sikh brothers get shanked with a knife in, LA because somebody thinks they're wearing a turban? I mean, the brother probably left where he's from because of the Muslims, and now he's getting, stabbed because of the Muslims. So yes, similarly disposed communities are, organized together in a post 9/11 context. And paradigmatically, the same is true. Like when we talk to young Muslims, first thing on my mouth is, Rosa Parks informs your Muslim identity in America. Cesar Chavez informs your Muslim American identity. If you're trying to carve a Muslim American identity that is not understanding the connectivity between your place on the spectrum of the American story and the place of Martin and Malcolm and Rosa and all of them, Cesar Chavez and all the communities that have attempted to integrate. If you don't understand that you are a point on that spectrum and there will come a day when you are not the point of issue, there is another point of issue, and you need to amplify the authenticity of your American identity to defend those people's space, you don't understand your Muslim American identity. So it's not just kind of to get your rights that you engage with other communities. It's also so you compose a paradigm that fits the Islamic experience that you're about to have. Is there one thing that changed my life? Yeah, it didn't change my life, but it really affected how I see things. And I was in Cuba between college and law school for a period of time, legally on a State Department visa, and I'm no longer going through security clearance, so I don't even know how to say that anymore. And I prayed, Muslim prayer, prayed next to someone very high in the Cuban government, the grandson of Khomeini, and one of the sons of Bob Marley. Praying like how I prayed growing up with Muslims. The only other experience that matched that was when I was in Turkmenistan, and I was meeting with non-Muslim religious leaders. And Turkmenistan, it was still when the Turkmenbashi was in charge. It's just last year. So, you got 7 Episcopalians in Turkmenistan, right? Because you have to register all of these religions. There's a lot of... And there was a Christian gentleman that was an evangelical Christian, one of 4 in Turkmenistan. From there, he was a Turkmen. And my grandfather was very ill. My Egyptian grandfather was very ill. God give him strength. And I asked this man to pray for my grandfather. And this guy did not speak a word of English. And I could not stop crying the whole time he was praying out loud. And I'm not really a crier. And I think those are 2 experiences that come to mind that are significant.
What was the second question? Did you ever doubt your faith? Is that what it was?
No, did you ever doubt your faith?
Was that the second
I took it as what was a significant experience in the pursuit of your faith. So for me, the comment is that it allowed me to see the global perspective of. But yeah, I doubt my faith today. I've always doubted my faith. If you're not doubting, you're not engaging. I mean, I'm not doubting it, thinking, well, maybe Islam is not the way. Maybe there's another way. But I mean, to assume that your critical thinking process is quarantined from your experience with the Lord and from your pursuit of faith and from your attempt to clean your heart of the malignance that comes into it, I mean, is a fallacy. I mean, pursuing God is with the mind, it's with the heart, and critical thinking is a necessary component of that relationship for a Muslim. So I would hope that I continue to doubt, not my faith, but my faithfulness.
Just to quickly answer the three questions. Thank you very much for the thoughtful questions. Separation of state and religion. Do I ever think there will be reform? Actually, prior to 1912, when we still had a Muslim caliphate, a Muslim empire, before the fall of the last Muslim empire, the Ottoman Empire, in the early 20th century, there was always a demarcation. Although there was an Islamic government, you can say Islamic state, there was always a demarcation between government and between religion. So, in fact, the religious scholars fought tooth and nail to maintain the independence and integrity of religious scholarship, of religious institution. And scholars were, their integrity was undermined if they were seen to play a role within the state or within the government. So they were always seen as separate. Islam does not believe in a theocracy as we see in Iran today or as we see in other parts of the world emerging. Islam never believed in the vision of a theocracy. Instead, you have a governance that is ruled according to Islamic law, that is governed by Islamic principles, but there was always the separation and demarcation of the two. And in fact, when it came to law itself, if it came to religious law, it was applied according for each their own religion. Have I ever had an experience? I'm not sure if I understood the second question correctly. I guess to go along with Ahmed, I mean, I guess an event that really affected me or had impact was when I went to Saudi Arabia. I went to Mecca and Medina for the first time in my life, and I visited the two most sacred sites in Islam, the Kaaba, which we believe was built by Abraham and his son Ishmael, and I visited Medina, the burial place of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his mosque. And I went in December 2000, and it was during the time of Ramadan. So there were thousands and thousands of people. In fact, on the 27th night of Ramadan, it's considered the holiest night because allegedly the Quran was revealed on that night, although we're not really sure because there are conflicting traditions. But they say that it's one of the nights that is also called the night of power. Anyhow, to make a long story short, the mosque, the Kaaba, what they call the Haram al-Sharif, the sacred mosque, is incredibly packed. And they said there were 3 million people there at that same point at that night. And I cannot express to you, what that experience was like. The woman, I remember there was a woman praying next to me who was from Nigeria, who had her baby tied like on her back, like she had the baby wrapped around her. And, the other woman next to me was speaking like Persian, and people speaking all sorts of languages, people from all sorts of places in the world. I remember I was doing tawaf around the Kaaba. Tawaf is where you circumambulate around the Kaaba, and I heard this girl speaking in English, and I turned around and I found it was my friend from Orlando. We used to play soccer. We had a soccer league for Muslim youth in Florida, and I saw her in the middle of the Kaaba. I mean, it was just amazing. But for all of us to be moving in harmony, praying and being there for one purpose, which is to worship God, I think it unearthed my humanity, and what it is that makes me human, and how common we are as human beings. But there are no words that can really express what that experience was like. But I remember after the prayer, the woman next to me, and it's been 7 years now, but turned around and said, because it was just a really emotional night. We spent the whole night praying, and at the end of the night, she turned to me tearfully and said, I hope the next time I see you is in heaven, inshallah, God willing. I just said inshallah. And it just, because this is what our lives are about. We all want to make it to heaven. We all want to make it to God. We all want to make it to His kingdom. But just, this is the essence of our being. This is the purpose of our existence, of worshiping God, is to meet God with a sound heart, to be accepted into God's heaven. And I just remember it was a very emotional experience. In terms of the third question, what kinds of political issues do we see on the horizon for Muslim Americans? I think it's important to make clear that the Muslim American community is not a monolith. We are a multiplicity of communities. We have the African American Muslim community. We have Latino Muslims. We have recent immigrant Muslims who are coming from war-torn countries like Somalia and Iraq, Palestine, and the issues for them might be different than older immigrant Muslims who are more established and more professional, have more professional occupations, and we have the indigenous Muslim community, the African American Muslim community, and the white American community as well. So the issues might vary, but I think in general the three main issues or most prominent issues are those of civil liberties, immigration, and the third would be foreign policy issues that I think would determine how Muslims cast their vote. I think those are the three issues that would play a role.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Hadia thankfully remembered that point. I mean, by some estimates, almost 47% of American Muslims are African American, are the descendants of a slave experience. So maybe in that community, Muslim American issues are healthcare, equal work for equal pay. For each of the components of the Muslim American community, and you see this diverse reality when you attempt to represent them in Washington, as Hadia and others have. It's very important that be underscored as much as possible, because just as we attempt, we want black Muslims to be black people, we want Chinese Muslims to be Chinese people. Right? We want Malay Muslims to be Malay. We don't want them to be anything other than what they are. And our job as a community is to ensure that intra-Muslim community, the umbrella is wide and the space is safe for as many components of that Muslim community to exist and be comfortable as absolutely possible. And, the challenges that our parents faced are not the same challenges that our children will face. And I guess we're just lucky that we're in the middle.
I've been charged with summing up this panel. I think I'm going to plead helplessness. And only to say that we are tremendously honored and grateful, Hadia and Ahmed, to have you here today, and that you would share so honestly from your experience, everything from poll numbers to stories from your own life, off-the-record poll numbers, of course.
Yeah, don't tell them I told you those numbers.
And that you would be willing to challenge us in love, and also to correct some of the things that we very much need to hear. So, if you would please join me in thanking them for their time here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to us.